issue, the relationship between media, religion, and politics, that is not new. But how would you, any of the panel say that over the last decade it's changed?
I'd like to flag one thing Mia said, which I think we need to underline, that one of the factors here is around the competence and the ability of even the formal journalistic institutions to be able to deal with religion. And in the context of the U.S., they do not. It's a terrible situation, and for a lot of reasons, because of the complexity and the history. But that's a major problem, a major flaw, is that those institutions who we should have depended on in the old, even in our old analog era, to help us frame these important questions, have just typically not been able to do that very well. And that situation is becoming more extreme now, where religion is so hard to pick out of these complex stories, the kinds that our friends were talking about. I mean, I think also about the Manaus crisis and the Australian refugee crisis, the island of Manaus and all. And you can't really understand that particular political framing without seeing religion as in the background. It's not in the foreground, but how journalism, which is so used to dealing with things that are manifest, deals with can go about dealing with things that are more that are further in the background.
Yeah, I mean, for me, one of the things that seems to have shifted is that increasingly media, especially in the United States, but also in other places, is now as much media as entertainment than as complex engagement with long forms of journalism. So the way that we're accessing news is, especially people of my generation and younger, through Twitter, through YouTube, through Facebook, that then channels you to certain forms of information that often predetermine what you're going to view based on what you've previously liked. And that comes to frame many of these religious questions, how one has access about debates over, say, immigration or healthcare. And it seems that the traditional model has, of course, been completely disrupted by this. But then asking, how do we engage and thinking about religion in this context, when now often religion isn't as neatly divided. You have these new alliances between Catholics and Protestants, or alliances between Jews and Christians, but you also, in the migration crisis, especially in Europe, have certain alliances between Christians and secular. So they find themselves appealing to both the Christian origins of Europe and the secular origins of Europe over and against the Muslims, and the ways in which that sort of bleeds into categories that we're used to talking about. We may have journalists that are used to talking about the religious versus the secular, but what happens when Christianity is coterminous with the secular, at least politically? How can we think about that in new ways?